For 40 years, I was the man who said no. No to grainy photographs. No to eyewitness testimony. No to footprint casts and hair samples and thermal imagery. No to hope, mystery, and the romantic notion that something ancient and unknowable still walked our forests. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and I built a career, a reputation, on systematic destruction of Bigfoot mythology. I wasn't just a skeptic, I was the skeptic. The one documentaries called when they needed someone to explain why believers were wrong. The one who'd published 17 peer-reviewed papers dismantling cryptozoological claims with surgical precision. I had my reasons. In 1978, when I was 19, my father, a forestry professor and weekend naturalist, became obsessed with Bigfoot. He abandoned his academic work, his family, everything that mattered, chasing shadows through the Cascades. My mother left him. My sister stopped speaking to him, and I watched a brilliant man descend into ridicule and financial ruin, all for something that didn't exist. He died in 1983, alone in a cabin in Oregon, his walls covered with maps and photographs and desperate notes. The coroner ruled it heart failure. I knew it was broken dreams, so I made it my life's work to save others from that delusion, to prevent more families from being destroyed by mythology masquerading as mystery. 40 years of methodical debunking, 40 years of being right, until 3 months ago. I was in the North Cascades, ironically, not far from where my father had spent his final years, filming a documentary segment about misidentified wildlife. We were packing up at dusk when my crew left to load the van. I stayed behind to shut down equipment, alone in a clearing as darkness settled like fog. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't match anything in my extensive database of wildlife vocalizations. Too low for elk, too complex for bear, too deliberate for wind through trees. I turned, and there it was, 30 feet away, 9 feet tall, watching me with eyes that reflected my equipment lights like amber glass. For 5 seconds, an eternity, we stared at each other. Every rational thought in my mind screamed, costume or hoax or impossible, but my body knew better. My DNA recognized something it hadn't seen in 50,000 years but still remembered. Another intelligent species. Then it did something that shattered my entire worldview. It gestured for me to follow. And then it spoke, not in words, but in something deeper than language. And what it told me about humanity made me understand why my father had given up everything to find them. Because they'd been studying us far longer than we'd been looking for them. And what they'd learned was terrifying. I should have run. Every survival instinct, every rational neuron firing in my brain screamed at me to retreat. Instead, I stood frozen, watching as this impossible being gestured again, a sweeping motion toward the tree line that was unmistakably an invitation. This isn't real, I whispered to myself, even as my hands fumbled for my phone. But the creature, I couldn't bring myself to call it Bigfoot, that word belonged to tabloids and hoaxes, seemed to anticipate my impulse. It made a sharp, disapproving sound and gestured again, more insistently this time. The meaning was clear. Come now, or I leave. Against every bit of professional training, against 40 years of cultivated skepticism, I followed. We moved through the forest for perhaps 20 minutes, the creature navigating with perfect confidence while I stumbled over roots and rocks in the deepening darkness. Twice I considered turning back. Twice I kept going, driven by something I couldn't name. Curiosity, yes, but also a strange sense of destiny, as if this moment had been waiting for me my entire life. We emerged into a small valley I'd never seen on any topographic map, ringed by cliffs and ancient cedars. And there, in the center, was something that made my breath catch. A shelter. Not a crude pile of branches, but an actual structure. Woven walls. A framework of logs that showed clear architectural planning. Even what looked like a ventilation system integrated into the roof design. Impossible, I breathed. Tool use, architectural planning, this level of... The creature made a sound that could only be described as amusement. Then, from the shelter, 3 more emerged. A female, smaller but still massive by human standards. 2 juveniles, perhaps 4 feet tall, clinging nervously to what I assumed was their mother. A family. I stood there, my entire academic career crumbling around me like paper and fire, and watched as they settled near a cold fire pit. The large male, the one who'd found me, gestured for me to sit. When I hesitated, he lowered himself to the ground first, assuming a non-threatening posture, and waited. Slowly, mechanically, I sat. What happened over the next 3 hours was beyond anything I could have prepared for. The male, I found myself thinking of him as the elder, given his obvious authority, began to communicate, not with words but through a sophisticated combination of gesture, vocalization, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Emotional projection, perhaps, pheromones, or simply the reading of body language at a level humans had forgotten, but I understood. He showed me, through careful pantomime and occasional sketches in the dirt using a sharp stone, a tool, my mind noted with academic hysteria, how long they'd been here, lines in the earth representing generations, too many to count. His people had been in these mountains since before written human history, since before agriculture, since before we built cities and forgot what it meant to be part of the forest. Then he showed me something that made my throat close, a representation of humans, not hostile, not fearful, but sad. The elder made sweeping gestures toward the valley, then toward distant peaks, showing range shrinking. Then he pointed to the sky and made motions I interpreted as loud birds, helicopters. He gestured toward trails and mimicked people with cameras. He showed me their world getting smaller, squeezed by humanity's endless expansion. "You're running out of places to hide," I said softly. He made a sound of affirmation. Then he did something that changed everything. He pulled out an object from a woven pouch at his side. Even in the darkness I recognized it. My father's field journal, the one he'd been carrying when he died. My hands trembled as I took it, opening to pages I'd only seen once 40 years ago, when I'd cleaned out his cabin and found his evidence too painful to examine. But now I looked, and I saw what I'd been too angry to see then. Detailed sketches, behavioral observations, notes about family structures and communication patterns and tool use. "He found you," I whispered. "My father actually found you." The elder made a complex vocalization, and somehow I understood. He found us. We allowed it. He was different from others. He understood respect. But he died alone, broken, ridiculed. Another vocalization, this one carrying what felt like regret. He died protecting our secret. He chose silence over proof. We mourned him. The implications crashed over me. My father hadn't been a fool. He'd been honored with knowledge he could never share, burdened with truth he couldn't prove without betraying it. And I'd spent 40 years calling his life's work delusion. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Why now?" The elder stood and gestured for me to follow again. We walked to the edge of the valley where the cliff face rose steep and dark. And there, carved into the stone with tools that must have taken years of work, was something that made me understand. A timeline, pictographic history stretching back thousands of years, showing their people living alongside humans. But the carvings grew darker, more troubled as they approached the present. Images of forests burning, images of their people fleeing, images of encounters gone wrong, fear, violence, death, and at the very end the most recent carving, a human with a device, a camera or phone, and their people scattering into mountains that were no longer there, pushed off the edge of the stone into blank space. "You're dying out," I said, the reality hitting like physical pain. Not quickly but inexorably. Habitat loss, climate change, human encroachment. "You're showing me because you need help?" The elder made a sound that wasn't quite agreement. He pointed to the carving again, then to me, then back to the human in the image. Then he made a gesture I somehow understood perfectly. "We don't need help. We need humans to understand what they're destroying. Not just us, but everything they used to be." And then he began to tell me, show me, what they'd learned from watching humanity for thousands of years. What they understood about us that we'd forgotten about ourselves. The message was devastating in its simplicity. We were the endangered species. We just didn't know it yet. The elder led me back to the fire pit, where the female had coaxed a small flame into being using friction methods that would have delighted primitive technology experts, if they could have seen it. The juveniles watched me with wary curiosity, occasionally making soft sounds to their mother, who would respond with equally gentle vocalizations. Communication, language, family, everything I'd denied for 40 years. The elder settled across from me, the fire illuminating his face with startling clarity. I could see intelligence there, yes, but also something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Deep, ancient sadness. He began to communicate again, and over the course of that long night I came to understand a perspective that humans had lost millennia ago. They had been watching us, not occasionally, not sporadically, but constantly, across generations. They'd observed our species' entire journey from hunter-gatherers to industrial civilization, and what they'd seen had filled them with something between pity and horror. The elder showed me through gestures and images in the dirt, humans in balance with the forest, taking only what was needed, moving with the seasons, understanding themselves as part of the ecosystem rather than separate from it. Then the shift, agriculture, settlements, the gradual separation from the natural world. You forgot how to listen, his gestures said. Forgot how to be still. Forgot that you're part of this, not owners of it. He showed me how his people had watched human population grow, watched villages become cities, watched forests fall and rivers choke and the air itself change, how they'd retreated deeper into wilderness, with each passing generation, not from fear of individual humans but from sorrow at what humanity had become. But we've built civilizations, I found myself arguing, as if defending my species to a being who'd been observing us with the patience of a behavioral scientist studying lab animals. Medicine, technology, art, philosophy. The elder made a sound that might have been acknowledgement, but his next gestures were clear. And what has it cost? What have you lost? He pointed to the juveniles playing a game with stones that involved complex rules I couldn't follow. Then he made a gesture toward the distant glow of human lights visible on the horizon, civilization, and mimicked humans staring at screens, hunched and isolated. The contrast was deliberate. Your young no longer play with each other. They play with machines. He showed me more. Humans rushing through forests with headphones, never hearing the forest itself. Humans photographing beauty, but never experiencing it. Humans so disconnected from their own bodies that they needed devices to tell them when to sleep, when to move, when to breathe deeply. We've gained knowledge, I said weakly. You've gained information. You've lost wisdom. The female approached then, carrying something I hadn't noticed before. A small container made from woven bark, containing water. She offered it to me with a gesture so gentle, so maternal, that I felt tears prick my eyes. I drank, and the water was cold and pure, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd drunk water that hadn't passed through pipes and filters and plastic bottles. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Why show me this? The elder stood and gestured for me to follow again. We walked to a different section of the valley, where a massive cedar had fallen years ago. Its trunk was rotting, returning to soil, and from that decay, dozens of seedlings were sprouting, new life from death, the cycle continuing. He pointed to the fallen giant, then to the seedlings, then to me. The message was clear. Death feeds life. This is balance. This is how it should be. Then he pointed toward the human lights again and made a gesture of taking, consuming, discarding. Your species breaks the cycle, takes without returning, consumes without feeding back. This is not sustainable. We're trying, I protested. Conservation efforts, renewable energy, environmental protection. He made that sound of amusement again, but darker this time. Then he showed me something that made my blood run cold. Through gestures and sounds, he told me about others of his kind. Populations in different regions who hadn't been as careful, who'd been discovered, documented, studied. He showed me what happened to them, habitats that became research zones, territories that became tourist attractions, freedom that became management. Your protection is another form of control. You cannot help yourselves. When you know something exists, you must possess it, study it, understand it completely, even when that understanding destroys what you sought to know. So you hide from us. Stay in the shadows. We observe from the shadows. And what we observe tells us this. Your species is in crisis. Not obvious yet, but deep. You've severed yourselves from everything that made you healthy. From the earth, from each other, from your own nature. He crouched and drew in the dirt, a human figure surrounded by other humans, by trees, by animals, by sky, all connected with lines. Then he erased the lines and showed the human isolated, surrounded by boxes that I understood represented buildings, cars, screens. The human figure in the second drawing looked smaller, diminished. You're dying of disconnection, and you don't even know you're sick. The elder looked at me with those ancient eyes, and I felt the weight of his next communication before he made it. Your father understood this. He came to us angry, broken by the same disconnection that wounds all your people. But time with us healed him. He learned to be still again, to listen, to be part of the forest rather than observer of it. He became more whole, Then why did he die alone? The anger in my voice surprised me. He died at peace. The alone was when he went back to your world, trying to tell others what he'd learned, but they couldn't hear him. The disconnection was too deep. I sat down heavily, my mind reeling. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd fought for, suddenly looked different. I'd thought my father was the deluded one. But what if the delusion was mine? What if the delusion was all of ours, thinking we could separate ourselves from nature without consequence? Why are you telling me this? I asked again. What do you want? The elder made a gesture that encompassed everything. The valley, the forest, the distant mountains, the whole living world. Then he pointed at me, and his meaning was devastatingly clear. We want you to remember what you were, before the forgetting, before the breaking. Because if your species doesn't remember soon, there won't be anything left to remember. Not us, not the forests, not even you. And then he showed me something that made me understand why this message was urgent. Why they'd finally chosen to reveal themselves to someone. Why they'd picked me, the son of the man who'd understood to carry this burden. He showed me what they knew was coming, and it was worse than I could have imagined. The elder led me to the cliff face again, but this time to a different section where the carvings were fresher, the stone still showing the marks of recent work. These pictographs weren't historical, they were predictive, prophetic almost, though based not on mysticism but on millennia of observation and pattern recognition. The first image showed forests, their trees smaller, sparser, struggling. The second showed rivers running shallow, some dried completely. The third showed their people scattered, fragmented into smaller and smaller groups. And the fourth showed no one, just empty valleys and silent forests. Extinction, I whispered. You're showing me your extinction timeline. The elder made a sound of affirmation, but then he gestured to continue looking. The next series of images showed humans, cities crumbling, people migrating in massive groups, conflicts over resources. Not apocalyptic destruction, no nuclear winter or zombie plague, just the slow, grinding collapse of systems stressed beyond sustainability. You're predicting civilizational collapse. Another affirmation. Then he showed me why. Images of connection, the lines between things breaking down. Forests too fragmented to support ecosystems. Weather patterns too disrupted for reliable agriculture. Human communities too isolated and fractured for collective survival. The web of relationships that sustained life, gradually tearing apart. When the connections break, everything dependent on them fails. This is not prophecy. This is pattern. But we have technology, I argued, even as the words felt hollow. We can engineer solutions, develop alternatives. The elder's response was patient but firm. He showed me more carvings, humans building walls, creating artificial environments, trying to control rather than adapt. And each attempt led to more problems, more disconnection, more brittleness in the system. You keep trying to solve problems with the same thinking that created them. Separation, control, dominance. But the problems come from separation itself. Then what's the solution? I demanded, frustration rising. Return to primitive life? Abandon civilization? That's not realistic for 8 billion people. The elder made a complex gesture that I struggled to interpret. Then the female approached, carrying one of the juveniles who had fallen asleep. She sat near me, and the child's breathing was soft and steady against her chest. She pointed to the child, then to the dying fire, then to the forest around us. And somehow I understood. Not primitive. Integrated. You can have your knowledge and tools, but remember they should serve connection, not replace it. The elder continued. Your father learned this. In his time with us, he found what he'd lost in your separated world. He tried to tell others, but the language your people speak now has no words for it. You talk about environment, as if it's something outside you. About resources, as if the living world exists to be consumed. About nature, as if you're not part of it. He gestured to himself, to his family, to the forest. We have no such words. We are the forest. The forest is us. No separation, no distinction. This is not primitive, it is accurate. I thought about my own life, my apartment with climate control, my meals from restaurants or grocery stores, my work done entirely indoors under artificial light, my relationships maintained through screens, my health managed with pharmaceuticals because I never moved enough or ate properly or slept in sync with natural rhythms. We're sick, I said quietly. As a species, we're sick, and we're too sick to recognize how sick we are. Yes. And you're showing me this because The elder crouched beside me and did something unexpected. He took my hand in his massive palm. The gesture was shocking in its gentleness, its intimacy. He pointed to my hand, then to his, and I saw what I'd been too professionally distant to see before. The similarities, opposable thumbs, articulated fingers, palm creases, the evolutionary echo of shared ancestry. However distant, we are related. Deep in time, we share roots. What happens to your kind affects our kind. Your sickness spreads. Your collapse will take us with it. So we must try, one more time, to wake you up by showing yourself to me, a professional debunker, someone who spent 40 years denying you exist. The elder made that amused sound again. Precisely. You've been inoculated against belief. If you can see truth, maybe others can too. If someone who denied us for 40 years can understand, maybe understanding is still possible. He released my hand and showed me something else, my father's journal, open to a specific page. I read by firelight. They don't want to be discovered. They don't want to be studied or saved or even believed in. They want to be left alone to live as they've always lived. But they know that's no longer possible. The world is too small now, the hiding places too few. So they're preparing for a choice no species should have to make: reveal themselves and lose everything, or remain hidden and die quietly when their last refuge disappears. I've tried to explain to them that humans can change, that we can learn, but watching the forest fall around us, seeing the same humans who might save them also destroy their habitat for timber or development, I'm not sure anymore. Maybe we're too broken to fix. Maybe the best I can do is tell this story and hope someone listens. Someone who isn't as broken as I was when I found them. Someone who can carry this knowledge without being destroyed by it. The date was 3 days before my father's death. He knew he was dying, I said, my voice thick. He was leaving instructions. For someone. For you. He talked about you often. The son who couldn't forgive him. Who thought he'd chosen delusion over family. He hoped someday you would understand he'd chosen truth over comfort. That he'd found something worth the sacrifice. Tears I'd held for 40 years finally broke through. I called him crazy. I built my entire career on proving he was wrong. I made him a cautionary tale about the dangers of belief without evidence. The elder's expression, yes, I could read his expressions now, held no judgment. You were protecting yourself from his pain, from the possibility of truth that would hurt too much. We understand protection. We've protected ourselves through hiding for thousands of years. But now you're done hiding. Now we're choosing the greater risk. Revelation. Because staying hidden means guaranteed slow extinction. But revelation might wake up enough of your people to change the pattern. You're gambling your existence on the possibility that humans can change. We're gambling our existence on the reality that if humans don't change, nothing survives. Not us. Not the forests. Not even you. So it's not really a gamble. It's necessity. I looked at the carvings on the cliff face again. The timeline of extinction. The prediction of collapse. What do you need from me? The elder stood, pulling me up with him. Then he gestured to the valley, the forest, the whole living world. Tell them what you've seen, not to prove we exist. That's the smallest truth. Tell them what we understand about them, about the sickness of separation, about what they've lost and how to find it again. Tell them your father wasn't crazy. He was ahead of his time. He saw the crisis coming and tried to warn them. They won't believe me. I'll be ridiculed just like he was. My career is already over just by being here, just by considering the possibility. Good. Your career was built on denial. Let it die. Build something new on truth. Your father did it. Now it's your turn. The weight of it settled on me like stone. I was being asked to do exactly what had destroyed my father. To sacrifice reputation, credibility, relationships, all in service of truth most people weren't ready to hear. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the message itself, that some truths matter more than comfort, was part of what humanity needed to relearn. I'll need evidence, I said, my practical mind already working. Footage, documentation, something to support. The elder made a sharp negative sound. No, that's your old thinking. Proof creates spectacle. Spectacle creates exploitation. We're not asking you to prove we exist. We're asking you to testify to what you've learned. The difference is everything. Testimony without proof, that's just belief, faith. Yes, maybe your species needs to remember how to trust direct experience over mediated proof, how to value wisdom from encounter over data from distance. This is part of the reconnection. I stood there between worlds, holding my father's journal, and felt the magnitude of choice. Continue the life I'd built on certainty and denial, or step into unknown territory with nothing but experience to guide me. Looking at the elder, at his family, at the living proof that reality contained more than my narrow paradigm had allowed, I realized the choice had already been made. The moment I followed him into this valley, everything changed. Now I just had to figure out how to carry that change back to a world that didn't want to hear it. Dawn broke over the valley with golden light that seemed to make everything more real, not less. I'd half expected to wake from what must surely be a dream, or breakdown, my clinical mind suggested, but instead I found myself still in their camp, watching the juveniles play a game that involved tossing pine cones with remarkable accuracy, while the adults prepared a morning meal of roots, berries, and what looked like dried fish. They offered me food. I accepted, sitting cross-legged on the ground like some evolutionary throwback, eating with my hands, and found it tasted better than any restaurant meal I could remember, because I was present, because there was no screen, no distraction, no mediation between me and the experience. See? The female's expression seemed to say. It's not complicated, but it was complicated. As the morning progressed and the elder continued his patient communication, I began to understand the impossible situation I'd been placed in. They weren't asking me to simply announce their existence. That would be the easy path, catastrophic, but straightforward. Instead, they were asking me to communicate something far more difficult, that humanity's crisis wasn't environmental or political or technological, but existential, that we'd forgotten how to be human in the fullest sense.
How do I tell people they're living wrong? I asked the elder as we sat by the dying fire. That everything modern civilization has built is fundamentally misaligned with how we're supposed to exist? That sounds like religious fundamentalism, primitivism, the kind of rhetoric that gets dismissed immediately. The elder made a patient gesture. Through signs and sounds he showed me. Not wrong, incomplete. They haven't lost everything, but they've lost balance.
Too much thinking, not enough sensing. Too much taking, not enough receiving. Too much doing, not enough being. That still sounds like New Age philosophy. People will laugh, especially coming from me, the man who's built 40 years on hard science and empirical evidence. Then let them laugh. Your father was laughed at. Did that make his understanding less true? The question struck deep. I thought about my father's final years, the ridicule he'd endured, the colleagues who'd abandoned him, the family, including me, who'd turned away in embarrassment. He'd been proven right, at least about their existence. But that vindication came 40 years too late, and only I knew it. I could document this, I said, thinking aloud. I have my phone. I could take video, photographs, clear evidence that would silence the skeptics. The elder's response was immediate and firm. No. But how else do I make people believe? Testimony without proof is just anecdote. The female approached then and did something that clarified everything. She pointed to my phone, made a gesture of capturing, taking, then pointed to her juvenile and made a gesture of protecting, hiding. Then she showed me a scenario in mime. Humans coming with cameras, with vehicles, with intent to study. The family fleeing, scattered, their life disrupted. Your proof becomes our prison, the elder reinforced. Besides, belief isn't what we need. Understanding is. And understanding comes from personal experience, not from viewing images on screens. So how do I convey personal experience without evidence? Story. Your father understood this. Humans used to pass wisdom through story. Before you decided that only measurable, repeatable data was true. Story carries the texture of experience. Story creates resonance. Data creates distance. I thought about indigenous oral traditions, about myths and legends that contained ecological knowledge and ethical frameworks, about how modernity had dismissed all of that as primitive, only to slowly rediscover that those stories encoded sophisticated understanding. You want me to become a storyteller. We want you to remember that you already are one. Every human is. It's one of your species' greatest gifts, the ability to share experience across time and distance through narrative. You've just forgotten to trust it. Over the next hours, the elder taught me, or rather reminded me, how to pay attention differently, how to observe without immediately categorizing, how to listen without planning response, how to be present without agenda. We walked through the forest and he showed me things I'd walked past thousands of times without seeing. The way certain plants grew only in relationship with certain fungi, the intricate communication between trees through underground networks, the complex social structures of corvids who watched and remembered and taught their young. Everything is connected. Everything communicates. Everything depends on relationship. You've forgotten this. You study things in isolation, single species, single systems, then wonder why your solutions fail, because you've lost the ability to see the whole. He showed me a fallen log, rotting and seemingly dead, but upon closer observation, teeming with life, insects, fungi, bacteria, new plants sprouting from the decay, death feeding life, destruction enabling creation. This is the balance. But your people fear death so much you've tried to eliminate it, to preserve everything artificially, and in doing so, you've disrupted the natural cycles of renewal. Back at the camp, I tried to explain the dilemma I faced. Even if I master story, even if I learn to communicate this understanding, I'm still the professional debunker. People know me as the skeptic who attacks this kind of thinking. My credibility is based on rejection of exactly the wisdom you're trying to have me share. The elder made a gesture I'd learned meant, think deeper. Your credibility with whom? With institutions that value separation, that reward specialization, that fund disconnection? Maybe it's time to build different credibility, with people who are already feeling the wrongness, who sense something missing but don't have words for it. That's millions of people who've invested in the system, who've shaped their lives around it. Exactly. And that investment creates the resistance. But the resistance comes from fear. Fear that if they admit the system is broken, they'll have to admit their complicity in that breaking. Your transformation might give them permission to transform too. I spent the afternoon documenting, not with my phone, but in the journal I'd brought for field notes. I wrote everything: observations, insights, the structure of their communication, the texture of their knowledge, not as data to be published, but as personal testimony to be shared. The female sat nearby with her juveniles, teaching them to identify medicinal plants. The simple act of education, direct, experiential, relational, contrasted sharply with modern schooling, where children sat in rows, absorbing information from screens and books disconnected from the living world they were supposedly learning about. We've made everything indirect, I said aloud. Learning, working, relating, even eating and sleeping. Everything mediated through technology or institutions or systems. No wonder we're sick. The elder made an affirmative sound, then showed me something poignant. He pretended to be a human hunched over a phone, scrolling and scrolling, his expression vacant, his body collapsed. Then he showed himself, upright, alert, eyes tracking movement in the trees, hands engaged with real objects, body fully present. The contrast was devastating in its accuracy. You've chosen comfort over aliveness, convenience over connection, control over participation, and now you're discovering that those trades weren't worth it. So what do I tell people? Give up their phones? Abandon cities? That's not realistic. Tell them to remember they have bodies. To remember those bodies belong to the earth, not to offices or apartments or vehicles. To remember that their minds evolved to navigate real environments, not virtual ones. To remember that their hearts know how to connect without apps mediating the connection. Start there. The rest will follow. As evening approached, I knew I had to make a decision. My documentary crew would be searching for me by now. I'd been gone nearly 24 hours. Soon there would be search and rescue, questions, professional consequences. I could go back and say nothing, claim I got lost, spent a night in the forest, found my way out, continue my career, maintain my reputation, keep their secret. Or I could go back and tell a truth that no one wanted to hear, that I'd met them, that they were real, that they'd shared wisdom my species desperately needed but was conditioned to reject. The cost would be everything I'd built, just like my father. He died for this, I said to the elder. For truth no one would accept. You're asking me to do the same. The elder's response was gentle but firm. We're asking you to live for it. That's harder. Death is one decision. Living in truth requires deciding every day to value connection over comfort. What if I can't do it? What if the pressure is too much, the isolation too painful? Then you'll understand why we've remained hidden so long. The burden of truth is heavy, but the burden of complicity and lies is heavier. You've carried it for 40 years. How much lighter do you feel now that you've set it down? I realized, with sharp clarity, that he was right. Something that had been clenched tight in my chest for decades had loosened. The anger at my father, yes, but something deeper. The exhaustion of maintaining certainty, of defending positions, of living in opposition to direct experience. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll tell them. I'll face whatever comes." The elder touched my shoulder, that gesture of connection I'd seen them use with each other. "Good. But remember, the message isn't, Bigfoot is real. The message is you are real and you've forgotten what that means. We're just the reminder." As I prepared to leave, the female approached with a gift. A small woven pouch containing seeds I didn't recognize. Through gestures, she explained, "Plant these, tend them. Remember that growth requires patience, attention, presence. Let them teach you what screens cannot." I accepted the gift with reverence, understanding it was both literal and symbolic, a practice to ground the philosophy, a daily reminder of the message I'd agreed to carry. The elder walked with me to the edge of their valley, pointing out the path that would lead me back to the trailhead where my crew would likely be staging search operations. Before I left, he made one final communication. "Your father planted seeds too. They didn't grow in his lifetime, but you're here. That means something survived. Trust that your seeds will find soil too, even if you don't see the harvest." I looked back once before entering the dense forest. The elder stood silhouetted against the morning sun, impossibly large, undeniably real, and I understood what my father had understood. Some truths are worth the cost of carrying them, even if that cost is everything. I emerged from the forest at noon, disheveled and transformed, to find exactly the chaos I'd expected. Search and rescue vehicles, my documentary crew in various states of panic and relief, and my producer running toward me with an expression of fury and concern. "Where the hell have you been? We've had 20 people searching for you. Do you have any idea?" She stopped mid-sentence, really looking at me. "Marcus, are you okay? You look like you've seen—" "I need to make a statement," I interrupted. "On camera. Now." Something in my tone must have registered because she didn't argue, just gestured to the camera operator. Within 2 minutes, I was on camera, and 40 years of careful reputation management was about to end. "My name is Dr. Marcus Webb," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "For 40 years, I've been the professional skeptic, the man who said Bigfoot didn't exist, couldn't exist. I've written papers, appeared in documentaries, built my entire career on systematic debunking of cryptozoological claims." I paused, feeling the weight of what came next. I was wrong. The crew exchanged glances. My producer made a gesture to keep rolling. "Not about every hoax I've exposed. Those were real hoaxes. Not about the importance of critical thinking or empirical evidence, but about certainty, about the arrogance of claiming comprehensive knowledge of what exists in wilderness we've barely begun to understand." I chose my words carefully, aware that I was threading a needle. Truth without evidence, testimony without spectacle. Last night I encountered something in these mountains that challenged everything I thought I knew, not just about cryptozoology, but about humanity's place in the natural world. And what I learned wasn't primarily about what might be out there. I looked directly into the camera. It was about what we've lost in here. I tapped my chest. I can't prove what I experienced. I have no video, no photographs, no physical evidence. And that's intentional, because what I learned is that not everything needs to be documented, dissected, and displayed. Some experiences are meant to be lived, not captured. Some wisdom is transmitted through encounter, not data. My producer made an urgent cutting gesture, but I continued. "My father, who I publicly dismissed as deluded, spent the last years of his life trying to tell people something I now understand was true, that we've disconnected ourselves from the living world to the point of pathology, that we've traded direct experience for mediated information, presence for convenience, relationship for control, and that this trade is killing us not dramatically but slowly, through epidemic loneliness, anxiety, depression, and physical illness that stems from living contrary to how our bodies and minds evolved." I took a breath, organizing thoughts that had clarified overnight into a structure I could share. Whether or not undocumented species exist in these forests, and I'm now open to that possibility, is less important than this. We've lost the ability to be in relationship with the natural world. We've forgotten that we're animals, that our health depends on connection with living systems, that our minds need real environments to navigate, that our hearts require authentic presence, not digital simulation. The camera kept rolling, my producer looking increasingly alarmed. I watched my father be destroyed by ridicule for trying to share wisdom that fell outside accepted paradigms. I participated in that destruction. And I'm here to say, I'm done. Done defending certainty over curiosity. Done prioritizing professional reputation over personal truth. Done choosing comfort over integrity. I pulled out my father's journal, the one the elder had returned to me. This is my father's field journal from his final expedition. In it, he documented not just observations of possible undocumented species, but insights about human health, ecological relationships, and the cost of disconnection. For 40 years, I've dismissed this as the ramblings of a deluded man. I was wrong to do that. Whatever he encountered in these mountains, and I now believe he encountered something real, it led him to truths about human well-being that we desperately need. I looked up from the journal to the camera. I'm not asking you to believe in Bigfoot. I'm asking you to consider that modern life has disconnected us from things we need to be healthy. Unmediated contact with nature, authentic relationships, physical presence, silence, darkness, natural rhythms. That this disconnection is making us sick in ways we've normalized as just how life is. And that indigenous peoples and traditional cultures have been trying to tell us this for centuries, but we've dismissed them as primitive because their wisdom doesn't fit our technological paradigm. My producer was now making frantic stop gestures, but the camera operator, to his credit, kept filming. I'm resigning my position at the university. I'm withdrawing my published papers arguing for complete dismissal of cryptozoological possibilities. And I'm dedicating whatever remains of my career to a different question. Not what's out there that we haven't found, but what have we lost about ourselves that we need to remember. I held up the woven pouch the female had given me. Someone gave me seeds yesterday, told me to plant them, tend them, learn from them. It's a practice, something to do with hands and attention, without apps or optimization or productivity metrics. Just presence, just relationship, just being part of the living world rather than separate from it. I looked at my crew, at people I'd worked with for years who were now looking at me like I'd lost my mind. I know how this sounds. I know you think I've had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I have. Or maybe I've had a breakthrough and what feels like madness is actually the beginning of sanity. Time will tell. I turned to my producer. You can use this footage or bury it. You can frame it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of going too deep into wilderness, or as testimony of a man who discovered something true. Either way, I've said what I needed to say. The silence that followed was profound. Then my producer spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Marcus, you're exhausted. You've been through a traumatic experience. Exposure, disorientation, probably mild hypothermia. Let's get you checked by medical personnel. Get some rest and discuss this when you're thinking clearly. I am thinking clearly, for the first time in 40 years. You're throwing away your career based on an experience you can't verify, can't prove, can't even fully articulate. Does that sound like clear thinking to you? It sounds like what my father did, and I finally understand why. The medical team arrived and insisted on checking me despite my protests. Physically, I was fine. Dehydrated, some minor scratches, but healthy. Mentally, according to their evaluation, I was coherent, oriented, showing no signs of delusion or impairment. Just a man who'd changed his mind about everything. The drive back to civilization was quiet. My crew clearly thought I'd suffered some kind of psychological break. My producer was already making calls about damage control, and I sat in the back of the van, holding my father's journal and the pouch of seeds, feeling more grounded than I'd felt in decades. When we reached the hotel, I found 17 missed calls and 32 emails, all demanding to know where I'd been, what had happened, whether the rumors about my on-camera statement were true. I wrote one email in response sent to my department chair, my publisher, and the production company. I've experienced something that requires me to reevaluate my entire career. I need time to process this and determine next steps. I'll be unreachable for the next month. Please respect my need for reflection. Then I turned off my phone, packed my essential belongings, and checked out of the hotel. I drove 3 hours to my father's old cabin, the one I'd inherited but never visited. Couldn't bear to visit because it represented his madness. The cabin was dusty but structurally sound. His maps still covered the walls. His notes still filled boxes in the corner. And sitting on his desk, as if waiting for me, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside, in my father's handwriting, Marcus, if you're reading this, something happened. Maybe I reached you somehow. Maybe they did. Either way, you're ready now to understand what I couldn't explain before. I'm not crazy. I'm not deluded. I'm awake in a world that's fallen asleep. That awakeness comes with a cost. You'll be seen as broken by people still dreaming, but it also comes with a gift. You'll see beauty they're too distracted to notice, feel connections they've forgotten exist, understand truths they've been conditioned to dismiss. It's lonely sometimes, but it's real. And reality, even painful reality, is better than comfortable delusion. I hope I lived long enough to tell you this in person. If not, know that I understood why you rejected me, why you built your career in opposition to everything I discovered. You were protecting yourself from pain that looked like it destroyed me. But it didn't destroy me, son. It freed me. And when you're ready, it will free you too. With love from the other side of awakening, Dad. I sat on the floor of his cabin and wept. For my father. For the years I'd wasted in opposition to truth. For the courage it took him to live in integrity when everyone, including his own son, called him delusional. And then I began my real work. Not proving what I'd experienced, but integrating it. Learning to live in the truth the elder had shown me, that my father had tried to teach me. The seeds went into soil outside the cabin. I would tend them daily, learning patience and presence and the rhythm of growth. The journal, my father's and now my own, would be filled with observations not about mysterious cryptids, but about the mystery of being human in a world we'd forgotten how to inhabit. And somehow, I would find a way to share this message that humanity desperately needed but didn't want to hear. We're the ones who are lost. And finding our way back requires giving up everything we think we know about what it means to be civilized, successful, modern. It requires remembering we're animals, connected animals, in a living world that needs us to wake up before it's too late. The elder had chosen me to carry this message. My father had prepared the way. Now it was my turn to plant seeds and trust they'd find soil, even if I never saw the harvest. The response to my statement was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the video had been leaked online. My producer, despite her concerns, couldn't resist the viral potential. It spread through skeptical communities first, where I was immediately labeled as having suffered a psychotic break. Threads dissected my obvious mental deterioration, compared me to other scientists who'd gone off the deep end, and speculated about what combination of isolation, exposure, and midlife crisis could produce such spectacular professional suicide. The cryptozoology believers, ironically, were equally dismissive. I'd spent 40 years attacking them. Now my sudden conversion looked like mockery or some elaborate hoax. What's his angle? They asked. What's he really trying to prove? My university issued a statement. Dr. Webb is taking a temporary leave of absence for personal reasons. His views as expressed in recent unauthorized footage do not represent the institution's position or scientific standards. Temporary leave. Translation: professional exile. My phone, which I'd reluctantly turned back on after 3 days, was flooded with interview requests from tabloid shows, conspiracy podcasts, and legitimate news outlets all wanting the same thing: the spectacle of a respected scientist's public unraveling. Only a handful of messages felt different. One came from a former colleague I barely knew, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who taught environmental psychology. Marcus, I don't know what you experienced in those mountains, but I recognize the pattern. I had my own awakening 7 years ago, not through cryptozoology, but through spending 3 months in the Amazon working with indigenous communities. I came back talking about interconnection and felt experience, and was promptly marginalized. If you need someone who understands, I'm here. Another came from Tom Miller, a name I didn't recognize initially, but his message clarified. I'm a park ranger in the North Cascades. I know what you saw. I know why you can't prove it. And I know how hard the path ahead will be. There are others of us. We should talk. A third, surprisingly, came from my sister Rebecca, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. I watched your video. I was ready to be embarrassed for you, to write it off as Dad's delusion finally infecting you too. But then I listened again. You weren't talking about monsters in the woods. You were talking about what Dad tried to tell us before he died. That we'd all gotten sick with busyness and disconnection. That we'd forgotten how to be present. I dismissed him then. I'm not dismissing you now. Can we talk? These messages, so few among hundreds of attacks and ridicule, became lifelines. I responded to each, and within a week I was part of a quiet network of people who'd each had their own encounters with what Tom called the edge of the known world. Not all had met the elder's people directly, but all had experienced something in wilderness that shattered their conventional understanding. The common thread, Dr. Chen explained during our first phone call, isn't the specific encounter. It's the recognition that modern human consciousness is operating in a drastically reduced bandwidth. We've convinced ourselves that rational, analytical, linguistic thinking is the pinnacle of cognition. But there are other ways of knowing, somatic, intuitive, relational, that we've atrophied through disuse. And when you try to explain that to people who haven't experienced it, they think you've lost your mind, because in their framework, you have. You're operating in a larger framework they can't perceive, so from their perspective, you've fallen off the edge. I spent that first month at my father's cabin essentially in retreat. I maintained the garden I'd started with the elder's seeds, which were sprouting beautifully, some kind of medicinal herb I'd later learn was nearly extinct in the wild. I read my father's journals cover to cover, finding in them not the ramblings of delusion but sophisticated observations about ecology, behavior, and the cost of human disconnection from natural systems. And I wrote, not academic papers, those days were over, but something between memoir and manifesto, trying to capture not just what I'd experienced but why it mattered. The writing was difficult because I had to resist my training to prove, to argue, to convince through data and logic. Instead, I was learning to testify, to witness, to share experience and trust the reader to find their own resonance. Tom visited in week 3, making the drive from Washington to my father's cabin in Oregon. He was in his mid-40s, weathered and quiet, with the presence of someone comfortable with silence. Your father and I corresponded the last year of his life, Tom told me over coffee. He knew about my relationship with them. We were both trying to figure out how to protect them while honoring what we'd learned. He never mentioned you. He didn't mention them to anyone. Too dangerous. But he documented everything, hoping someday someone would understand. Tom looked around the cabin at my father's maps and notes. Looks like his hope was well-founded. I destroyed his reputation for 40 years, and now you're following the same path. That's a kind of redemption. We talked for hours, comparing observations, discussing strategies. Tom had been working with indigenous communities to establish protected corridors, buying land through anonymous conservation trusts, quietly removing trail cameras and sabotaging research projects that got too close to sensitive territories. It's guerrilla conservation, he said. We can't work through official channels because official documentation would expose them. So we work in the shadows, just like they do. How many others are in this network? 47 that I know of, probably more who stay completely isolated. We're spread across the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, parts of Alaska, all of us carrying the same burden, knowledge we can't share, work we can't publicize, a cause that will never be recognized because success means continued anonymity. My father died alone because of this knowledge. He died alone because he tried to share it with people who couldn't hear. That's why we found each other, those of us who can hear it, who've lived it. You're not alone, Marcus, you never were. You just hadn't found your actual community yet. The validation was profound. For the first time since emerging from those mountains, I didn't feel crazy. Different, yes. Operating outside conventional paradigms, absolutely. But not delusional. Dr. Chen visited the following week, bringing 3 of her graduate students who were studying what she called ecological consciousness, the cognitive and emotional capacity to perceive oneself as embedded in rather than separate from natural systems. Your experience, she told me, fits a pattern we're seeing increasingly. People spending extended time in wilderness, really present, not just passing through, report perceptual shifts. They start noticing relationships they'd been trained to ignore. They feel connections they'd been taught were impossible, and they come back changed, often struggling to function in conventional society because they can't unsee what they've seen. Society labels that as dysfunction. Society labels anything that threatens its operating assumptions as dysfunction. But what if society's operating assumptions are the actual dysfunction? What if disconnection is the pathology, and reconnection feels like madness only because disconnection has become normalized? Her students were taking notes, their faces showing the intensity of those encountering ideas that rearranged their understanding. One asked, "But how do you function? How do you hold down jobs, maintain relationships, live in modern society, when you're seeing it all as fundamentally misaligned?" I thought about my answer carefully. You don't try to go back to who you were. You can't unsee what you've seen. Instead, you find ways to integrate, to bring the wisdom of reconnection into whatever sphere of influence you have. For me, that might mean writing, teaching in non-academic settings, supporting conservation work. For others, it might mean different applications. But you've given up your career, your credibility, I've given up a career built on being professionally certain about things I wasn't actually certain about. What I've gained is integrity, alignment between what I know and what I profess to know. That's worth more than any credential. By the end of that month, I'd made some decisions. I would not return to academia, at least not in my former role. I would not try to prove what I'd experienced. Instead, I would focus on a different mission, helping others understand what indigenous peoples and traditional cultures had been trying to tell modern society for centuries. That we're part of the natural world, not separate from it. That our health depends on maintaining that connection. That disconnection creates the epidemic loneliness, anxiety, depression, and physical illness that plague modern populations. I didn't need to prove the elders' people existed to make that case. The message stood on its own. But I also wouldn't deny what I'd experienced. When asked directly, I would tell the truth. I encountered something in those mountains that challenged my understanding of what's possible. Something intelligent, ancient, and profoundly wise about human nature. Whether people believed that was up to them. My job was just to plant seeds and trust they'd find fertile soil. The harvest wasn't my responsibility. 6 months after my encounter, I returned to the North Cascades. Not to find the elder. I understood our meeting had been gift enough, perhaps once in a lifetime, but to honor what I'd learned by walking the same territories my father had walked, seeing them with new eyes. Tom accompanied me, acting as guide and protector. "They know you're here," he said as we set up camp in a familiar valley. "They've been watching since we crossed into their range." "How do you know?" He pointed to subtle signs I'd learned to recognize. A branch placed deliberately across the trail, a pattern of stones that communicated observed territory, fresh scratches on a tree that marked a boundary. They're saying hello and setting limits. They're glad you came back, but reminding you of appropriate distance. I understood. The intimacy of that first encounter didn't establish permanent proximity. They had lives, territories, concerns beyond my education. Respecting their boundaries was part of honoring what they'd shared. That night I felt their presence nearby, not threatening, just aware, monitoring. I sat by the fire and spoke aloud, feeling foolish, but also trusting it would be understood. "I've done what you asked," started telling a different story. "Lost my career, my reputation, most of my professional relationships, but I've also found something I didn't know I was missing. Integrity, purpose, connection." The forest was silent, but it felt like listening silence, not empty silence. "My father died trying to share what you taught him. I'm trying not to make the same mistakes. Not pushing too hard, not demanding belief. Just offering testimony and letting people find their own way to understanding." A sound in the darkness. Soft, brief, but unmistakably responsive. They were there, hearing me. "I planted the seeds your mate gave me. They're growing. I tend them every day. And in tending them, I'm learning what you wanted me to learn. Presence, patience, relationship. How growth can't be forced or optimized or accelerated. How some things require time and attention and trust in processes I can't control." Another sound, closer. Tom touched my arm gently. "Look up." At the edge of the firelight, a shape. Not the elder, but one of the juveniles I'd met before. Now adolescent, taller but still recognizable by the pattern of lighter fur on their chest. They stood watching, head tilted in that characteristic gesture of curiosity. I remained still, not reaching out, not approaching, just acknowledging their presence with a slight nod. The juvenile made a soft vocalization, then pulled something from a small pouch at their side. They were learning to use tools. I noted with academic joy I couldn't suppress, and tossed it toward me. It landed near the fire, another small carved figure, this one showing a human planting seeds while one of their people watched from the trees. The message was clear. "We see what you're doing. We approve. Continue." Then the juvenile vanished into darkness as if they'd never been there. Tom smiled. "That's as close to validation as you're going to get. They're acknowledging your work. Work that will never be recognized by the institutions that used to define my worth, but recognized by beings whose opinion actually matters. Which carries more weight?" The question didn't need answering. Over the next few days, I saw more evidence of their presence without direct encounter. Food left near our camp, roots and berries, carefully selected. A repaired section of our tent that had torn during setup. Small gifts that said, "You're welcome here. You understand the protocol." On the final night, Tom and I sat up late, and he shared something he'd been holding back. "There's a decision point coming. Technology is advancing faster than our ability to protect them. Satellite imaging, DNA analysis from environmental samples, AI pattern recognition that can identify anomalies in movement data. Within 5 years, maybe 10, their existence will be undeniable even without direct contact. So all this work to keep them secret buys time. Time for what? I'm not sure. Maybe for humanity to develop the ethical framework to encounter them appropriately. Maybe just for them to live a few more generations in peace. But the era of hiding is ending. What do they think about that? They're preparing, making decisions about how to respond when the inevitable happens. Some of the elders advocate for first contact on their terms, approaching selected humans, building relationships before forced exposure. Others argue for retreat to even more remote territories, playing the hiding game as long as possible. And a few, he paused, his expression troubled. A few argue for something else. What? For letting themselves die out, going extinct quietly rather than becoming managed, studied, or spectacularized, choosing dignity and ending over degradation and survival. The horror of that option silenced me, that a species would choose extinction over the kind of exposure humanity would inevitably bring. What did that say about us? What did it say about how we treat the remarkable, the different, the wild? We can't let that happen, I said finally. Then we need to change humanity's relationship with the unknown. We need people who've learned what you've learned, what your father learned, spreading that understanding faster than technology spreads surveillance. It's a race, and we're losing. I thought about my small efforts, a blog, occasional speaking engagements at non-academic venues, conversations with individuals ready to hear. It felt inadequate against the force of technological progress and human curiosity. It's not enough, I said. What I'm doing, writing essays and planting seeds, it's not enough. Maybe not, but it's what was asked of you. The elder didn't request you to save them. He asked you to tell the truth about human disconnection. That truth is important whether they survive or not. That sounds like accepting their extinction. That sounds like honoring their wisdom even if the outcome is tragic. They've been around for thousands of years. They understand mortality, cycles, the natural order. Maybe they know something we don't about when it's time to let go. I couldn't accept that, wouldn't accept it, but I also understood I couldn't save them through force of will, only through helping humanity remember how to exist in relationship rather than dominance. That night I dreamed of the elder. He was standing at the edge of a cliff, not the one with carvings, but a metaphorical edge between existence and extinction. He looked at me and made a gesture I'd seen before. This is not your choice. This is ours. Honor our agency. I woke with tears on my face and understanding in my heart. They weren't asking to be saved. They were asking to be understood. And if understanding came too late to prevent extinction, at least the extinction would be witnessed, mourned, and learned from, unlike the countless other species we'd driven to extinction without even noticing. When we broke camp the next morning, I left my own offering, my father's original journal, wrapped in waterproof material and placed in a hollow tree where I knew they'd find it. A return of their gift, documentation of their existence that would stay in their hands, not ours. Tom watched me do it and nodded approval. That's the right gesture, trusting them with their own story. As we hiked out, I looked back once at the valley. No visible presence, but I felt watched, felt acknowledged, felt a connection that transcended species and would remain whether or not they survived. Some relationships persist beyond physical proximity. Some truths endure beyond the beings who embody them. And some wisdom survives even when its teachers vanish. My job was to make sure the wisdom survived, even if they didn't, even if that was the hardest work I'd ever do. 3 years have passed since that morning in the North Cascades. 3 years of living in the tension between two worlds. The modern human world that thinks I've lost my mind, and the deeper world I accessed through my encounter with the elder. I'm 59 now. My hair has gone fully gray, and I've developed the weather-worn look of someone who spends more time outdoors than in. I live full-time in my father's cabin, which I've restored and expanded into a small education center. Not academic education, something else, something older. People come here, not many, but the right ones. They find me through word of mouth, through my blog, through the network Tom helped me connect with. They come seeking what they can't name, reconnection, understanding, a way to live that doesn't feel like constant violence against their own nature. I teach them what the elder taught me, how to pay attention, how to be present, how to recognize they're part of the living world rather than separate from it. We spend time in silence. We work with soil and plants. We learn to track animals not just for information but for relationship. We practice being uncomfortable, uncertain, and alive. No certificates, no credentials, just transformation. Dr. Chen's work has gained some academic traction. Her papers on ecological consciousness and relational cognition are being cited, discussed, slowly shifting conversation about human well-being and environmental connection. She's more diplomatic than I am, more willing to work within institutional frameworks, but the message is the same. Disconnection is pathology, and reconnection is healing. Tom continues his quiet protection work, now coordinating a network of 47 known protectors across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The surveillance pressures have intensified. Better satellites, more sophisticated AI, increasing encroachment on remote territories. But they've also gotten smarter about avoidance, about creating false signals, about using technology's blind spots. It's an arms race neither side wants, but both are locked into. My sister Rebecca visits quarterly. She's left her corporate job and retrained as a wilderness therapy guide, working with teenagers who are, in her words, drowning in screens and starving for reality. We've rebuilt our relationship, bonded by shared commitment to the wisdom our father tried to give us. "Do you think Dad knew?" she asked during her last visit. "That you'd eventually understand? That I would? I think he hoped. That's all anyone can do. Plant seeds and hope they find fertile soil. The seeds from the elder's mate have propagated. I now have a garden full of that rare medicinal herb, which I've identified as an almost extinct variety that indigenous peoples used for respiratory ailments. I've shared seeds with Tom, with Chen, with others in the network. The plant is spreading quietly, being reintroduced to areas where it had vanished. It's a small act of restoration, but restoration has to start somewhere. I haven't seen the elder again, haven't seen any of them directly since that last visit 3 years ago, but I see evidence of their presence. Tracks occasionally near the cabin, markings on trees, once a small gift of woven cedar bark left on my porch. They're still there, still watching, still existing in the spaces between human awareness. But Tom's prediction is proving accurate. Last year, a geneticist in British Columbia published a paper about anomalous primate DNA found in water samples from remote streams. The paper was cautious, careful, academically hedged, but the implication was clear. Something unknown was out there. The paper got limited attention, dismissed by most as probably contamination or misidentification. But it's the beginning. More papers will follow. More evidence will accumulate. Eventually, the weight of accumulated data will exceed the threshold of denial. And then what? I've been preparing for that moment, building relationships with indigenous leaders who've always known but never told, with conservation groups willing to think beyond conventional frameworks, with lawyers interested in the question of how to establish legal personhood for non-human intelligence. If, when, exposure happens, we need to be ready with alternatives to the typical human response of study, categorize, control. We need frameworks for relationship rather than possession, for coexistence rather than management. It's probably too little, too late, but it's all I can do. Last month, on the 5th anniversary of my father's death, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen. My father sitting by a fire and next to him, visible in the frame, the elder, both looking at the camera, clearly held by someone else, some member of the elder's family who'd learned to use human technology. My father's expression was peaceful, joyful even. Home. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as my father's. "Marcus, if you're reading this, it means someone decided you were ready. I'm not crazy. I'm not deluded. I'm more sane than I've ever been. I found family in the most unexpected place, learned truths I'll never be able to prove, and discovered that being called crazy is a small price for being awake. I hope you find your way to this understanding. I hope it doesn't take you as long as it took me, and I hope you're kinder to yourself about the journey than you've been to me. With love from beyond your current understanding, Dad." I framed that photo. It sits on my desk next to the carved figures the elder and his family gave me. Evidence I'll never share publicly, but truth I live with daily. Yesterday, a young woman arrived at the cabin. She introduced herself as a wildlife biologist, recently fired from a state agency for refusing to place trail cameras in a sensitive watershed. She'd heard about me through the network, had read my unpublished manuscript about human disconnection. I had an encounter, she said carefully, watching my reaction. 3 months ago in the Olympics. I can't tell anyone official, can't publish anything about it, can't even fully process what it meant. But I know my life changed, and I know I can't go back to living like I did before. I invited her to stay, to learn, to integrate her experience. She's the 17th such person who's found their way here, the growing edge of a movement that doesn't yet have a name, might never have a name, but is spreading through quiet transformation rather than public proclamation. We're the ones who've encountered the edge of the known world and returned changed. We're the bridge between the dying paradigm of separation and whatever comes next. We're planting seeds in human consciousness, hoping they take root before it's too late. Will it be enough? I don't know. The elder told me that my job wasn't to save them, just to tell the truth. Truth about human disconnection, about what we've lost, about what we need to remember. I'm doing that, one person at a time. One conversation, one teaching, one moment of presence shared. The harvest isn't my responsibility. I'm just the sower. But sometimes, late at night, I hear vocalizations in the distant forest. Complex, beautiful, carrying meaning I can almost grasp. And I know they're still there, still existing, still holding wisdom humanity desperately needs. And I know my father died at peace because he'd touched that wisdom. And I know I'll die at peace too because I've chosen the same path. Some things are more important than being believed. Some truths are worth carrying even if they cost everything. And some relationships transcend species, transcend proof, transcend even survival.